I guess it's time.
It is time.
No more jokes.
No more jokes. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ethnos podcast, where we are talking about our setting, Ethnos. It is a sci fantasy, weird body horror, absurdist, whatever, kitchen sink universe. Uh, and we love it. And we're making a tabletop game for it. We've got a codex ongoing on Roll Anvil. Uh, yeah. And let's see. Tyler, why don't you introduce yourself? And then I'll introduce myself.
Howdy, everyone. My name is Tyler. I most commonly go as Baron online. I've been a co-developer officially with Ethnos for about 3 years. I've been contributing lore and writing for Ethnos probably for more like 8 years. Um, I did the first playtest of these games of our first RPG system in college. So yeah, it's just been a long road. My favorite part of Ethnos is actually playing Ethnos and exploring the alien worlds. Um, there's just something so amazing about the world building that goes into Ethnos that just makes it addicting. It is the world I want to explore, and I'm honored to be someone who contributes to making that a reality. And something else we like to do. I'm a big gunsmith, gun nut, gun history person. So I get to use some of that knowledge in making ethnos warfare and ethnos military tactics and stuff a lot of fun. So yeah, that's me. It's about me.
Oh, that was a great intro. I'm all touched and motivated now.
There you go.
Um, I'm Jackie. I go by Adamall online. I am the director slash original creator of Ethnos. I am a captive to its story. I cannot get it out of my head. It's been following me since I was a young child, and every now and then people get sucked up in the wake of it. And Tyler's been following me, like he said, for about a decade. Uh, for Ethnos, and then we've been besties for ages. Um,
I'm a fully drowned corpse at this point. I got caught in that wake, and I was just like I've been dragging behind for miles at
that's
this point.
vivid, grotesque, and wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Um, so we're starting this podcast to, share some of the world building we've done while we focus on rebuilding the codex to be more new reader friendly, and while we work on our TTRPG. Figured let's give something to everyone to listen to and to hear a bit more about Ethnos. And this season, we're focusing on Jutai. Now, Jutai is one of Ethnos's two cradle worlds. Cradle worlds meaning that this is where like life evolved from. One of those worlds is Eden, which is the renamed Earth, and it gets renamed a couple hundred years from now, after everything falls apart and we get invaded by the the Aempians, people from Jutai, which is the other cradle world. We're gonna use this season to kind of go around the world map of Jutai a bit, talk about some of the regions, and tell you about the life and geography of those areas and how it gave rise to the civilizations that now are upon it. Uh, what are
Yeah.
we gonna cover this episode, Tyler?
So we're going after the deserts of Kajh Tai. So Kajh Tai is a big old massive alien desert that basically dominates the southwestern end of the mainland. Um, and this desert is built on a coralline shelf.
What's
So
Coralum?
yeah, exactly. That's the point I need to get into next. So coralline, there's not a lot of hard earth on Jutai, as in it's not like where you're sitting right now, potentially where you have dirt and rock and minerals and ore underneath you. In Jutai, a lot of the livable land surface is made out of something called coralline, which is like think of a coral on Earth, but imagine if coral were able to grow millions of times their size to the point where they are basically livable soil. Of course, it comes with its own downsides, like it's very easy to erode, easy to collapse, very porous. A lot of water gets through it, making coral in tubes, something we're going to be covering a lot very soon. Um, but that's what all of Katai, or a majority of it, is on, is this coral-like land. So it makes this crazy, porous, dangerous desert that we're going to get to really explore here. Uh, yeah, Katai. It's a big
That's
subject.
great. That was great. Um, so for those who are listening live, I'm posting screenshots of the world map to go along with it. Those of you at home, well, you should check out our codex.
You should.
Worldanvil.com/ethnos. Will take you to our homepage, and you can either hunt around in there, which we're still organizing it and cleaning it up, so that could be a bit daunting, but you're totally welcome to. There's some organization to it. Or if you want to hear it straight from us live, join our Discord. Go to our top bar and click the third icon from the left from the wheel. That'll bring you right to us. We're active in our Discord pretty often. We're kind of quiet these days because 2022 is 2022. But we're lurking, we're watching, and we're listening.
No, we still talk and update. We just
Yeah,
haven't. Yeah,
I'm
there's.
lurking.
Well, I'm talking. Again, that's worldanvil.com/ethnos.
All right,
So don't
so
worry.
that's a great overview of Kajh Tai and of how the coralum works.
Yeah, hopefully I caught that. I've never really had to do a vocal explanation of what
Yeah,
coral is.
yeah, you passed the test.
Whew. All right, I keep my job for another year.
So we're going to read the Kajh Tai region off. It's one of the articles on World Anvil. And it's very short because we decided to start these in bits and then we're going to grow them from there. And we're going to talk about each article here on the podcast after we read it, get some questions from the people who are listening live and answer them and just have some world building discussion and then wrap it up from there. So nice, chill, hang out, learn lore, and call it good.
Yeah, let's do it. So we're gonna
All right.
read the article next?
Yeah. Let me just have a quick drink of water, and then do you want to take the first one, or do you want me to take the first one?
Man, I just talked a lot about coral and I need a break.
Hmm. Yeah, I figured.
I'll take the quote.
All right. So this is about the Kajh Tai region. Kajh Tai region is the lands of strength, framed within the harsh deserts and jagged coral and peaks. The life of Kajh Tai ekes out its existence with no intention of relenting. While the surface appears windswept and inhospitable, a rich and hardy ecology thrives below the crust of dirt and coral. The coral and caves below slosh with water, fueling the life above. The natural patterns of Jutai create an always ebbing tide of life, death, and rebirth. The deserts, coralums, and deep chasms of the Kajh Tai region have molded a rugged, exotic, and alien ecosystem, even when compared to the rest of Jutai.
Beautiful. All right. The land of Kautai is inconquestable. It can never truly be mastered. Even the Ka have to preen their cities constantly or face to collapse beneath the sands and storms. But where Sophantic life carves its way out of the deserts, the native flora and fauna have evolved to survive on the natural cycles of the land instead. Quote from a Sazashi anthropologist.
Comprising the area to the west of Valusair and east of the Rotanagra, the Katai region is on the ground level, a mix of rocky mountains to the north and south and high altitude steppes in the middle. These steppes and plateaus hold some of the largest coralline formations on the planet, large enough to contain both the Rakalathar geode and the the largest known underground river that runs from the bottom of the Idsartan Ural down to the ocean. Creatures from the surface of the Kajh Tai region are hardy, sparse, and dangerous. Creatures native to below the surface have adapted to use the massive water flows and spaces contained beneath the coral to survive. What life survives on the surface draws its waters from the twisting coralline tunnels below. Etymology: Kajh Tai, named after the Ka people. Uh, Types of coral formations include table coral, coral chasms, and ventricular coral. And its highest peak is the Idsartan Crest at 12,310 feet. That's 3,752 meters for you who use metric.
Oh, nice. Okay. So to give a quick summary on some of the notable subregions. So Idsartan Ural, a high plateau broken in the middle by the Idsartan mountain range. At base elevation, the land is a cold desert with abundant soil and minerals. Large cave systems spiderweb downwards into the mountains until they meet the corallums to the south. There's the Vamathair Bay, a large inland reaching sea. The Vamathair Bay not only allows ships to travel inland towards the I can't speak Sasashi, Yakolathar geode, but also hosts the mouth of the subterranean highway. It is the largest trade port of the region and hosts a rich wildlife beneath the surface. You should read the next one, Jacqueline.
Yeah, the Yachlathar geode.
Yeah.
Jutai's largest natural geode coral. This underground formation is large enough to host its own ecosystems within the hardened shells and crystals. Now, within the codex entry, you can get a little more info about the geode coral, so I'll read it off for the listeners. But geode coral is a domesticated coral species native to Jutai. It is a smooth, hollow orb with boreholes that feeder tendrils extend outwards from. If other coral seeds the bores, it ends up inside the geode, where the mixture of nutrients and darkness causes aesthetic fractal growth patterns. Once a mere novelty sold to sailors and merchants who frequented the mid-sea ports of the Sahara Reef Federation, geode coral caught the attention of the mainland, grew into a competitive artistic industry. Kind of alongside. Oops. Uh, Next notable subregion of Kajh Tai is the Subterranean Highway. It is a massive underground river carved through the entirety of the Kajh Tai region, made stable by hardened, erosion-resistant coralline. This water flow promotes life both on the surface above and the coralline below. Um, so that's the article. But uh, basically, this whole region and a lot of the landmass itself is a thick crust of coral over a massive subterranean ocean. Um, because the coralline has those tubes, the seawater, the tides tend to come in for thousands of miles underground, just slowly gurgling through this curving Swiss cheese system of caves eternally. It's pretty deadly to go down there because you can get caught up. Certain places will just be dry for months and then suddenly fill up with water. And they have their own ecosystems down there that are alien and often entirely intraversible. Um, and most savant, which are the thinking, acting, feeling, civilized, whatever people you want to call them, of the surface or of the world, like humanity and the Sazashi and the Varen, they tend to just live on that upper crust of the coralum, somewhere between the salty, windswept, sandy, scorched surface and the cold, churning, gurgling depths of the coral.
Yeah, and having this sort of underground civilization leads to a lot of interesting technologies and options that they've given themselves for surviving. Because yeah, as you just mentioned, nothing survives on the surface up here. There's so much that absolutely makes it unlivable. One, it's hot as heck.
Yep. The
Just say
surface
that,
of
like, yeah,
the
it's
surface of
like
Jutai has a little more methane in it than ours, and the sun's pretty warm, and their deserts can get up to 160 degrees on a hot day.
yeah.
So
So
don't be out there.
you will cook.
Yeah, that's enough to
So,
kill most people in about 4 or 5 minutes.
but Ka can probably survive out there for an hour or two if they need to. Maybe
That's
longer.
yeah, and that's mostly because of their what they wear out there. I think
That's true.
even a caw caught, buck naked in the open sands would be, you
Yeah,
know,
that's true. Pretty hard
grilled.
pressed to survive.
Yep.
But
Um,
besides just that, I mean, you also have the glass storms, which we
mhm,
actually, it was only recently that we actually came up for. We always had the idea of these glass storms that would cause the Katai region basically to turn into, imagine a being hit by a haboob, but instead of sand, it was sharpened obsidian.
yeah,
So just if you're caught out there with just with any skin exposed or clothing that isn't made for it, you're gonna get shredded alive.
yeah, and it's not obsidian, so
It's not, but it's like
yeah,
that.
yeah, despite the fact that it's so blisteringly hot, the coral does continue to grow, and it continues to push upwards, usually in these it takes a while, but for example, there's some coral that'll grow straight up into these huge mushroom plateau shapes, and in their shadows, other ecosystems will eventually grow up and either turn it into one big column underneath the mushroom, or when the mushroom falls over, get exposed to the sun, bake out, die, skeletonize, and then the all the little tiny fossils of coral that comprise that creature turn into these needles, basically. Like as the wind wears them down, it's just left as little shards and needles. And when the wind breaks those off during a sandstorm, it just scatters these entire dunes of bony needles everywhere. And if you're
And
caught
they're
outside for that,
probably, how fast are they traveling? Like 100 miles per hour in a bad storm or something?
I think on land storms, it's rare that any wind can get above. Unless you're talking like a tornado, which does happen, but I think like 50 or 60 is pretty blistering.
Oh, yeah, true.
For super fast storms, this is why we do the Beaufort and Pajita or whatever it's called scales uh differently is because sea storms get so much faster than land storms. I can't imagine Tai would get above 70 or 80 miles an hour, but 70 miles an hour is enough to leave you like holding onto a signpost as your body goes vertical or horizontal. Like that's absurd wind. So even a 50 or 60 mile an hour wind of, bony shards being pelted into you is gonna do a lot of damage. And if you have machinery on the surface, everything's gonna just get clogged up and ruined all the time. So they living underground is not just a for temperature, but it's also to stay away from all these horrible storms that happen. And that's just one kind. I mean, there's also what are some of the other dangers of living on Jutai? There's the spore storms because
Oh, yeah.
since everything's evolved from the coral in some way, pretty much like most plants are variants on coral that have either become like more, you know, flowing or semi-rigid in other ways. But most of them they spore like fungus, and you can get these entire clouds of it going that looks like, like some of the clouds on Jutai are miscolored just because of how many spores are in the air and like surviving in those clouds while they wait to drop down out of the atmosphere. Which can be pretty because some of them glow, so you can have glow clouds. But if you see a big red glowing cloud approaching on the horizon, that means that it's a pretty bad form of fungal storm coming at you. So it's like, oh, it's like a gorgeous aurora borealis, and then it rains down and everything sucks. So respirators, full body cloth, shade, water. I think most of the people that would be crossing the surface would look like a giant lumbering turtle trying to survive out there.
Mhm. Hmm. God, that's really cool to think about, though. Like, so a couple questions I have. So we mentioned these needles as being able to gum up machines. So how brittle are these shards?
Uh, they're
So like,
pretty they're pretty brittle. I think over time they would definitely wear into sand and be harmless. But the problem is that as coral, I don't know if you know how like necessarily how coral works on like a cellular level, but in case someone doesn't, um, way coral grows, and this for both Jutai and Earth, I'm just calling it coral. Um, but it's a organism, like cellular organism that grows over old layers of that organism. So when you're seeing like a coral formation, it's the outermost layer that is usually the living layer, I believe. Like the deeper layers are just technically fossil bone.
mhm,
Um, and so, I mean, there's various kinds of coral. Like there's you know leafy kinds and stuff like that in the oceans. But as like a general rule, it's polyps growing on polyps, and that's true for the coral on Jutai as well. That's why I'm just going to call it coral because it works very similarly to coral in our world. And so when those outer layers die, you get this very textured, rough, bony surface. And as the winds of Kajh Tai wear on it, it'll kind of
erode.
it'll erode, but it may erode in different, like it won't erode the whole structure at once. It leaves the more support structure of the cell behind, which are like the or the of the of the surface behind. And so you end up with these more spiky structures. And it's when the winds come sweeping down and snap them off and hasn't yet had time to like tumble them into sand. That's when the storm is at its most dangerous. And every now and then gusts of it will just leave, needles on the ground. And the surface itself is baked so that if you're stepping on it barefoot, you may, you know, find that the ground is powdery with all those spines like sticking up through them. So you want thick boots. Um, and yeah, it'll wear into sand over time, but it's still like you're gonna find a lot of needles in that haystack with the barefoot.
Not going to be a lot of hay in that needle stack.
Yeah. um, let's see.
Well, so we talked a lot about the surface.
Uh-huh.
I mean, one thing we didn't get to talk about on the surface is like what does live up there? Because right now we painted it as this completely inhospitable waste that nothing can live in, but that's not the case. It
Mhm.
is still alive on the surface. Just like deserts on Earth, the life up there has to be so specifically adapted to survive. So it appears alien in itself.
Mhm.
So
So
I'm not. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
some of the creatures, and I'm gonna generate as we talk. But something that would fare better up there would be, for example, a imagine a large crab-like creature whose shell is kind of elevated above its body, like it has like a canopy shell. Moves
Okay.
slowly, so it kind of carries its own shade with it. It minimizes its contact with the ground and uses like hard, chitin instead of getting its meat close to the ground where it can burn. And overall, like it's a creature that's very spindly and doesn't have a lot of like meat or anything on it. It's just a small body with long spindly legs and a raised canopy shell that gives it like some distance for hot air to escape from between its, you know, its body and its shell. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It's probably it's also very good at using its claws to dig into the coral in order to get to the cooler coral underneath if needed. So during the hottest part of the day, it can kind of bury itself a bit to keep cool.
Or yeah, I like that. Or
Now we're
its
just world building.
claws might be very well articulated into going into a lot of different direct not claws, but its feet might be well articulated to go into a lot of different directions at once. Like most insects or crabs or crustaceans, their claws always kind of point downwards. But if they had a higher degree of, joint mobility, imagine, you go into like you find a few pieces of like large coral pillars kind of forming an A, and then you look up and at the top of it is this like weird spindly creature just balanced between the two with its claws dug into all the sides to hold itself up. That'd be pretty creepy. It'd be a good ambush predator.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other. I mean, we haven't answered that question yet. What does it eat? What does it attack?
I guess we
Sounds
got to
like
put a scale limit on it or scale on it. I imagine it probably weighs like 90 pounds.
oh wow,
So,
okay, you went way heavier than I did.
well, I was thinking something that's like, 7 or 8 feet tall, something
Oh,
intimidating if you were to come across it. Yeah. Yeah.
phew, okay. He's big crab.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um,
So yeah, so it would ambush. It would basically use its weight to freaking donkey on the head potentially.
I could drop on you with all those, needle legs pointed down.
Yep. Just try to
Yeah.
do
There we
you.
go.
So yeah,
I'm gonna,
that's a crazy creature. That lives on the surface. So
yeah,
gosh, makes it
that's
even
canon
more
now.
fun to visit. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of fungal growths that grow on the surface, especially in places where water might flow underneath the coral for a certain amount of time out of the year.
Mhm. Yeah. So
Uh,
that's
yeah.
something I touched on it a little at first, but it really is important to realize that every piece of land that isn't terrestrial, that's on coral, um, is over an ocean. It may be a kilometer below you, it may be a couple kilometers below you, but somewhere down there, the ocean has flooded the lower chambers of the coral. Because remember, it's struck through with all those tunnels, and those tunnels only get wider the deeper down you go.
Hmm.
Um, until you've got these rooms that you can drive submarines through.
And you got 2 moons worth of tidal forces
Yep.
that can move all this
And
water around.
yeah, so there's stuff that comes up sometimes. Not usually from deep, usually the strata keeps to its own ecosystems. But what can happen is that for one, even though it'll be a blistering hot on the surface, it could be cold in the depths. And what can happen is that you'll see these explosions of mist as the tides push cold air rushing out of all the coral openings in the
Cold, humid
surface.
air,
Yeah, humid cold air even.
even.
Yeah, which if you were to stand, I always imagine that if you were to stand like just in front of one of those, sometimes it would be enough to shock your body from the
It
heat
would
to the
also,
cold.
I mean, how much pressure would it have? Would it have enough to like potentially knock you back? Like just
Probably, I can't imagine. I don't know how much sort of pressure something like that would make, but I imagine not much. I guess it would depend on how much air was being pushed up by how much water through how small of a exit. But I think for the most parts, you would hear this like deep rumbling wind,
yeah,
kind of flute like, and of many parts because you're hearing it from multiple choral entrances at once. Because I figure in most spaces, you may not always be able to find them, but you're probably at least within a few hundred feet of a way down into the coral if you're on
yeah.
the ground. Um, Granted, most of them are grown over and may even have roots covering them, so you may not know you're that close to one. But all those spots, you could hear them just ooh, and then bam, like mist just blowing up.
Gosh.
And with that can
Imagine,
come new predators because they'll come out to take advantage of the camouflage. So
I mean, then you're gonna have creatures that's like, we watched Planet Earth and all that stuff, and when the waters go through a freaking desert and like the entire ecosystem changes for that moment, you'd have that exact same thing at these exits of mist because suddenly there's water everywhere. So you would have these plants like, how a cacti, its body is built in a way that it absorbs gallons of water
mhm.
whenever there's water.
Well,
So
that's true.
you'd have this, it would become alive in a really crazy way for just a short amount of time.
It'd be very dangerous because you'd have a lot of creatures scrabbling for water while you're scrabbling for water.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're scrabbling for water, you might also be like, "Hey, bodies are 70% water. I'm just going to eat this guy."
Yeah.
You
Oh
know.
yeah.
So it's basically a feeding frenzy. But the other thing I imagined is, how we're working on a module on the side. A little self plug. We're working on a one shot module. But we imagined this giant tendril that went underground and it's alive, and I was trying to think of how to explain it. Katai and the fact that there's only water below the surface could lead to some freaking massive plant with tap roots that go like a mile down.
Oh yeah.
And it could be so huge, but whenever it taps into any water source, it just starts draining it. And the cool thing is, as it brings it back to the surface, you can get all these creatures and stuff that get into the taproot and start taking their own little bit of water.
Oh yeah.
So it could almost be like this taproot oasis that goes all the way up to the surface.
Meat River.
Meat River, yeah. Meat River is a sentence to say we are 30 minutes into the podcast.
Oh, that's great. All right. Well, we can keep talking, or we can take some questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions. Oh, oh
Let's
wow,
see.
you've been scribbling this whole time?
I just pulled it open and tried to do a quick shape for the spindly
For this
articulated
oh,
bug.
they remind me of chrysalids from what is it from?
XCOM?
XCOM. Yeah, thank you.
Just wild guess that seems like an XCOM creature.
Mhm.
Oh, Shadow has a question about how we came up with the names of the region and the subregion. Well, part of it is throwing words against the wall to see what sticks. Um, and part of it is that there's a chicken and the egg a little bit here. Of sometimes we make words in the Suzashi language and we write them down, and we have like a big old just sheet of all the words we've written down. And sometimes we need a word and we make it up, and sometimes we make up a word and figure out what it means later. Now, most of the words we've said today we have a meaning for, like ka tai. Well, tai means home, and ka is one of the savant, one of the types of Suzashi. Now, on Jutai, the first evolved savant was the Varen, which are they're probably close to your standard picture of elves. A little different proportions, a little more kind of animalistic, deer-like faces, but overall,
And horns, massive
and
horns.
horns. They got horns. Every different kind of Varen has different horns. Like the Feo have what looks more like antlers. The Sao they have what looks more like branches. The Chea have more of a ram-shaped head. Stuff like that. They learned enough magic to make the Suzashi from themselves and from other species on the surface because the Varen live on a country called Vera, which we will It's its own continent, and we're actually going to talk about it later in this podcast. But the Varen live there. They evolved there. It's a kind of a mild region, as you're going to learn. To them, stuff like Kajh Tai is they couldn't grasp how to survive there, and they managed to do so kind of fleetingly. And part of the ways they helped themselves to survive all over this hostile world was to create the Suzashi to help them, to serve them, and all this stuff. Uh, as you might imagine, the Suzashi weren't super fond of that, so they took over the world and shoved the Varen back to their corner. When they did that, there's a few different ways that they argued about how they would split up the land. Everyone on the North Continent said that we'll spread up by uh, basically each Suzashi gets their own region, and the people in the Southern land said that's stupid, you'll get racism, and they kept everyone merged. And this region was taken over by the Ka, uh, which that's spelled Kajh. Um, for those curious, but Ka also works. I'm posting a picture. Well, I'm posting their article to the podcast text right now for those who are live. But the Ka are this very strong, like they're very physically strong. They're made for lifting, punching, breaking things, flattening things. Uh, they've got these, huge Goron arms basically, and they live in Kajh Tai. They take that region, and their claws are strong enough that they can actually excavate the coral by bare hand if they need to. So that's why it's called Kajh Tai, where they decided to live. Not every country is so simply named, but they said this is where the Ka live. This is our home. That's what we're going to call
No one showed up for the vote because they were too busy building their house.
it. And part of it is, they chose Ka as their name, so they're like, we're proud of that name. We're going to keep it, and we're also going to uh, call everything we own Ka something.
Welcome to welcome to home of Ka. My name is Ka. I am a Ka. How may I help you?
Something I we didn't really cover about the region is that the different types of coral, how it
Mhm.
grows. There's a few continental types of coral. There's the table coral, which just kind of grows out flat along the surface of whatever water it finds and fills up that area. So if it found a lake, it would cover over the lake basically, and as it grew and displaced, the water levels would raise with it until it reached kind of an equilibrium with the water, where the top level was only a few feet above the water. Kajh Tai has something called ventricular coral, which as it grows tends to create these massive, kind of like a beehive structure, almost hexagonal, kind of rounded, where they close in regions that can be like kilometers wide and just kind of tend to cultivate a kind of fog farm in there to keep everything alive. They don't do this consciously, it's just how they've evolved. But as the ventricular coral keeps growing upwards, it tends to close and create a dome. And then it will just spread out again, and it keeps forming these cells. And they can run pretty deep. And that's where the Ka tend to live, is they'll find one of these ventricular um uh cells,
Yeah.
and strengthen the structure. They'll test all of the ground around it to see if it's, safe as well as they can. They'll reinforce it, and then they live in it. And since those are kind of surface level, they're a lot easier to account for how water is going to interact with them. If you go too deep, then there's too many other coral tubes to really account for, like, was this area going to get flooded or not? How often does it get flooded? There's definitely a science to it, and there's definitely scientists
It's
dedicated to
pretty
it. But
yeah, thinking about that scientist stuff just makes me really think, like, how critical it would be to the weather to keep track of the moon cycles.
Oh yeah.
Like when like it would be as primary as like seeing what the humidity is on American or on like on our forecasts. It'd be like it's going to be a tidal force of this, this, and this tonight
Oh yeah.
because it's just crazy to think about. Um, so I'm wondering, do we want to talk a bit about like the Ka technology, or do we want to talk a bit about the landmarks? We have 25 minutes left until we hit the hour, so I'd love to
Well,
maybe
let's
hear a little bit.
yeah, I'm curious what questions you have or anyone listening has about the region. If you want to hear more about the tech or the creatures or the architecture, like anything would be easy to. Oh, here we go. We got a question about the weather you mentioned. Did they ever have an interest in a sort of claw-made drop to make digging out easier? Uh, Drawing out the coral and letting it die can be there is a purpose to it because they can definitely they know how to transplant coral and get it growing again. Uh, so I imagine that they might do that if they wanted to excavate a large area, but how long it would take to dry out, they would really have to dam it up underground as well, and then just turn the whole thing into like
Mhm.
a fossilizing ball that they can just crush up and
Well, who knows? At this
excavate.
point, coral is a living thing, so the Ka may have, or somewhere early on in their history, found some sort of paste or liquid that they could brew that would rapidly kill that coral.
Yeah, it wouldn't take much. I mean, most acids it doesn't take much to strip out like a surface of a plant or something. So even if they were acid proof, you could find something. Just pee on it, it's good. It's done. It's dead.
Pee and stomp it with your foot, and you make yourself a hole.
Uh,
I don't know if that's canon.
well, it could be weird, but like at the same time, like they gotta like pump their sewage and stuff somewhere. They might as well pump it to like some area they're gonna crush up, hollow out, and turn into farmland.
Hmm. Oh, because they might have some sort of treatment of sewage that both kills the coral and fertilizes the resulting skeletal remains.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, something Artemis is asking in the chat, it's kind of touching on here, is they're asking about a section where they used to overindulge in that and cause long-term damage. So one of the big dangers of the coral is that it cracks and breaks. It's not stone. Some of it can be about as strong as granite, but it has weakness. And sometimes it happens naturally, but more times throughout history, it's been someone's hubris or greed. The dwarves dug too deep a little bit, one of those situations where they'll cause a coral collapse, a sinkhole. And the problem with that is that if the sinkhole's too big, it tends to just keep growing. And there are places all over the map. Let me see if I can point a couple out. Actually, there's a couple right there within Kajh Tai I can point out. Perfect. I think these three are all sinkholes. And what they had to do was basically anticipate where the sinkhole would be in the time it would take them to build a wall to contain it. So this can be, a many year project where they say, oh, this sinkhole is going to spread out for a kilometer. If we wanted to build a wall, or it's going to sink out a kilometer over the next, 20 years. If we wanted to build a wall to stop it halfway, we could build this size in the right amount of time. But if we built too short, it's going to collapse before we finish the wall. If we build too wide, then we're sacrificing too much land. It becomes quite an economic problem to argue over like how to handle that once it starts. But
It's like it's almost like building on a glacier.
a little bit, yeah. Um, you want to see a really big one, uh, northwest. this lake on the very
Well,
northwest
they
of Kajh
can't see it,
Tai.
but
No, I know. I'm so on the northwest of Kajh Tai. So if you go to the Jutai article on World Anvil,
mhm.
there's a world map, and Jutai is spelled Jhoutai. There's a map. Top right, you can turn on the nations. You can find Kajh Tai. There's like a button for layers. Turn on the pack nations, find Kajh Tai, and in the northwest, you'll see this bay, and that's supposed to be a little river, but now it's a bay because there was a huge collapse. Mm, yeah, so there's definitely spots where it's happened, and they've just had to save what land they could by building these huge towers down through the coral ahead of where it was going to hit, or anything they could do to slow its growth with building magic. And yeah, it's pretty much it, building and magic. um so there would
Yeah,
definitely be some interesting ruins to explore in those cities.
scary. God, because all of that's gonna have all sorts of creatures in that water.
Hmm. And it was probably, I mean, you don't they probably built cities near wherever that resource was that they dug too deep for. So
That's true. So there's
imagine
probably
just going down into this like deep dark hole where it's like you can look up and see sun, but it's, almost the opening of the hole is almost a mile above you or more, and it's just this cold lake at the bottom with buildings half falling into it or sunken beneath the waters.
oof. Yeah, that's terrifying. That's a terrifying image.
You're welcome.
But so we talked a bit about the surface. There's quite a few more creatures on the surface, but let's see what else. Um, what about the technology to build these cities? It's fun to talk about the cities. I don't know if we want to talk more about the cities or go back to the geo region itself.
I'm good with any direction, honestly.
Okay.
It's a strong world building exercise, and I'm having fun. This is the part of it I enjoy is just chatting about it, and then now we have it saved for posterity.
So one thing I don't think we got to talk about yet was the Itsarden Neural or the subterranean highway.
Hmm.
I think both of those are extremely critical to this because it explains a couple of concepts of how this coralum is useful. I mean, it obviously provides so many challenges, but the Ka managed to get lucky enough to have a pretty shallow, stable, what basically underground river that goes all the way up to like the northwestern part of the continent from the ocean to the south.
Yeah. So
So it's the Katai version of the Nile.
yeah. So I'm gonna post to the chat so people can see the way this river runs.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're trying to if you're somehow trying to follow along later, then
No, we don't have to. Come on.
yeah. Anyway,
Let's have more fun
sorry.
talking about stuff.
Join us live.
Yes, there you go.
So anyway, something to point about that is that it's not a necessarily a man. Well, it's not a natural river. Um, it's somewhat natural, but it's kind of like an underground Mississippi, where a lot of the ventricles of the above chambers go down into it. And what they did is they found like one big path they wanted to feed, dammed off a lot of the exits, and poured out the rivers until they were much wider. They made a whole like set of locks
Oh,
and
so it's like a giant Suez Canal.
yeah, exactly. And it wasn't as well. I don't know if I would say it was more or less work than the Suez, but it definitely uh was a lot of work, and it
It was
almost
probably centuries of work. Like, that was probably a project that started small and just continued to grow and grow
yeah, is over
through.
time. It wasn't like 1 liter. It was just like we're gonna do this. And as you can see, right at the middle, it did cause a sinkhole.
Whoops.
They probably had to work around it, but um,
No, you just do a sweet jump.
yeah, that's the Yakalatthar Lake. Was it? No. So their
Meta.
technology is pretty. I wouldn't. I'm not gonna like when they made this. It was advanced in like a. They were extreme builders. They kind of have like almost a post-apocalyptic sort of technology where the Varen at their peak when they made the Suzashi probably could have taken humanity currently. They were a bit above us in some ways and behind us in other ways. And if it had been, Varen versus humans, technologically, that would have been quite a match. And then the Suzashi toppled everything and didn't trust the energy source that the Suzashi were not the Suzashi, the Varen were using. So a lot of Varen tech got wiped, but a lot of knowledge got kept at the same time. So it's very hard to kind of pin down exactly where they're what you would kind of call their tech as because it can be primitive in some ways and then super advanced in others. But a lot of their understanding of earth shaping, using their own magic and stuff like that. Those were pretty advanced. And uh so the methods this wouldn't be flat either. Like I said, it'd have a lot of locks where you'd have ships going up and down through the ventricles through, lock systems of raising and lowering the water. I
Mhm.
think they would actually have a very, very strong grasp of uh, plumbing and water control that
Infrastructure. Yeah.
yeah, that we have never had demand for. I mean, this is like an utterly otherworldly scenario that would just be too expensive to even entertain on Earth. Like, why would we build like a 50 lock, you know, little stretch just to get people on this basically ocean elevator through all of these shipping lanes? Like that,
Just take an airplane.
yeah. I mean, imagine like the city itself, like after it collapsed on Yakalathar Lake. Imagine they just rebuilt. Like they didn't leave. They're just like, oh, that sucks, but it's kind of convenient. So we're gonna build just over this lake again because now we have a water source. It's huge. It's open. It has sunlight now. Um, and they just tamped it all down and built on it again, using the old dead city as a foundation. And now it's probably got, hundreds of different lanes of boats coming in and different levels, like whatever they could figure out how to do to get more boats in there. Whether it's like tons of side highways and stuff that just become like backup lanes. Like I'm sure it gets crazy in there because that's their main, their home city.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so they're also like surprisingly good navally. Like you don't know how much of a navy they're hiding in their country.
They just all come out of the ground and you're like, "Whoa." Well, to be fair, water travel has never been a huge priority of Sasha, I don't think, right?
No, mostly because they don't really trade with other like the continents don't intertrade much.
Yeah, it's just the mainland.
Yeah. Well, the Marianian territories are, every not every bit as habited as the mainland, but they are nations. But the North barely talks about them because the average citizen in the North doesn't know much about the South. And most of the politicians of the North, though, know that they're exploiting the Southern continent. They just don't talk about it much. I mean, there's so
Oh,
many like mining colonies and military contractors that go to the South, and you never hear about it in their news because who
yeah.
cares about the Corsica region? Like, where's that?
Okay.
Um, so
But
anyway,
Yeah, let's get back to the Kajh thing.
Um, yeah, and then Artemis had another question. Is this a modern border dispute between Kajh Tai and Khartoum? Since borders tend to be split down the middle of a river, was the sinkhole on the Kajh Tai side and Khartoum is pushing for a border shift, or they're salvaged? So that big old bay I pointed out where there's the border that cuts through the middle of the bay, um, the whole thing that happened is that's called the Hell's Cauldron, and that was pretty much just all a Kajh Tai mistake. They were the ones doing all the mining there. Probably the not Kajh Tai. I guess this you could go 50-50 on whose fault it was, but Khartoum was the one who ordered all the mining going on there. And when that collapsed, it it took their entire economy with it. The It didn't help that that was also during a war with Valusair that happened. Um, and oh no, that wasn't Kotai's fault because Valusair triggered it. Yeah, Valusair just came in and nuked it, basically, collapsed it, took out the Khartoum economy, and turned it into a hellscape for years to follow. Um, so yeah, that was pretty much like if you look real close, that's the bleeding head wound that killed their entire country.
Ouch.
Yeah, took a few hundred years for them to recover. Their Neje forest died, so their entire surface turned into just a gray, dead landscape with nothing to hold back the heat and nothing to that knew how to survive in the heat, unlike Katai.
So I want to go back. I want to go back to Kajh because we're probably got about 4 more minutes before we should start doing our closing.
Actually, a pausing aside from Jackie here, about 3 days later, this is about where the audio cut out, so this is just patched in, and we're gonna jump right back to where the pod wraps up.
Well, did Craig stop recording?
Yeah, we lost a
When?
few seconds.
Oh, just a few seconds. Okay. Well, we can split that together. Sorry, guys. There
Yeah,
might have been a little hiccup in the recording. That was our bot. But I think it's a really good segue into closing.
yeah,
So this was the first episode. It was a lot of fun. Um, Hopefully, we didn't go too crazy with the map or image references. But if you have any feedback for us, feel free to hop into our Discord and just mention us and let us know what you thought because it's kind of the only way we know how to respond to things right now.
yep. So you can either you can join pretty much all of our socials from rollanvil.com/ethnos. We have a top bar that has our Twitter, our Discord, our Twitch, our store, and if you're feeling very charitable, our Patreon. We use the funds from our Patreon to fund art and music for the setting, and eventually more expensive things like 3D modeling, video games, and we're looking at once we get the tabletop out, buying a 3D printer and printing out actual minis of the Suzashi, Varen, and humans so that you can play Ethnos, with like something proper, tangible. Um,
Proper tangible.
Proper, tangible. So
But yeah,
thank you
so
all for listening.
mhm,
Oh, and some extra credits.
yep.
When we release this, we're probably gonna have it end and start with some music. Music credit is Lanuum Amaro. You can find him on our Discord, but he's also on Fiverr. Lanuemamero. He's a great guy. I highly recommend him. All
And
right, thanks.
there's probably some art that's going
Yep,
with this podcast, and that art is done by our very amazing Oscar.
yep,
So you can catch him on the Discord as well.
yep. He's sneaky.
He's sneaky, yeah. He's he's careful.
He's watching you, but you won't be able to find him. He's sneaky.
Yeah.
He's
So
he's a lurker. All right.
thanks everybody for joining. We will see you on the next episode, episode 2, which we will name once we know what we're actually going to talk about. If you have any
Yeah.
ideas, hit us up.
All right. You have a good
Ciao.
one.